Hello and welcome to the Video Vortex. This week we're going to be looking at guilty pleasures. Now these might not be the greatest films ever made, even though they have some terrific actors in them, and others perhaps not so. Some might have ropey special effects and dialogue and massive continuity errors. However, I don't want to laugh at these films, I want to laugh with them, and I would argue that I would rather watch these films than 90% of movies ever made. They are completely unpretentious and they brought so much fun and joy into my life. So I'm not aiming to slag them off in any way. I'm paying tribute and I want to spread the audiences to them. There are no zombie movies included in this list because there's going to be a special guilty pleasure zombie episode in the near future. The first film is Starcrash from 1978. This was directed by Luigi Cozzi under the name of Lewis Coates. He was a bit of a protege of Dario Argento. He worked as assistant director on Stendhal Syndrome and Two Evil Eyes. Safe to say this movie is a bit of a rip-off of Star Wars, which had been out the previous year and had been incredibly successful at the time, one of the most successful movies ever made. However, the special effects go more back to the kind of Ray Harryhausen era of the kind of 50s and 60s. He was famous for doing kind of model work, special effects. What can I say about this movie? Well, I could talk about it all day. To give you an idea of the sort of quality of what is on presentation here, John Barry, the James Bond music composer, was hired to do the score for it. Some of the music actually sounds like it's from Moonraker a little bit, and it is set in space, of course. But they were afraid to show the film to John Barry because they thought he would walk off the project. The director also made a rip-off of Alien called Alien Contamination, which is quite decent as well. It doesn't quite have the fun of this film. The Italian film industry was quite reactionary to popular trends at that time. It was a great way of making money. So a film like Cannibal Apocalypse had the title Apocalypse Domani in certain territories to kind of riff off Apocalypse Now at the time. So let's have a look at some of the performances in this movie. You get Caroline Munro, who I think was perhaps not the greatest actress in the world, but she has so much charisma, a bit like Marilyn Monroe. They might not have enormous acting talents, but they're very watchable presences on screen. Her voice was dubbed by an American actress. You've got the legend that is Joe Spinell, who was like an almost film industry on his own, big influence on films like Maniac. He starred in the Godfather trilogy. He was nearly in Jaws but kind of pulled out at the last minute. He's in Rocky. He's in lots and lots of Hollywood films of the 1960s and 70s, and he plays the evil count in this movie. You get the Oscar nominated Christopher Plummer, who turned up for a couple of days filming for a bit of holiday money, and he plays the Emperor, and he has one of the greatest lines in cinema history. It's something like, "Space battleship, halt the passage of time," and that's the kind of level of dialogue we've got in here. And there's also lines in there from Elle, this robot. It says, "Now it's time for a bit of robot chauvinism." The robot also says, "Maybe it's time to use your ancient system of prayer and hope that it works for robots as well." Yes, this is the standard of dialogue. You get an early performance from David Hasselhoff, most famous for Baywatch and Piranha Double D, 3 Double D I think it's called. And he's got like a kind of crazy perm in this. One of the lead actors in this, one of the Italian actors, actually started off his career actually going round Italy as a kind of faith healer, and he did that for quite a while. He was like a child faith healer, and then he decided to become an actor instead, and he's got some kind of classic funky 70s hair as well. We mentioned the music's generally terrific, and there's a really good pace to this movie. Ends every sort of 10-15 minutes we change into a different location. Keep an eye out for an actor who has a small role who is famous for appearing as the titled character in The Beast in Heat, a famous video nasty from the 1980s in the UK. The next film is Herschel Gordon Lewis's The Gore Gore Girls from 1972. Herschel Gordon Lewis is part of horror folklore. His film Blood Feast was one of the earliest films on the video nasties list, made in the early 1960s. It terrified driving audiences in America, despite the fact that you could clearly see that a lot of the special effects were mannequins with like chopped liver stuck near them, and quite kind of like hyper stylized reality in a way. So in Blood Feast you get people with haircuts like Wilma from The Simpsons. This movie though, The Gore Gore Girls, what can I say about this? absolutely hilarious from start to finish. The plot of which I can follow is based on the fact that there are murders going on in strip clubs, and a local reporter, very much a bit like Lois Lane, joins forces with a private detective who's a kind of camp theatrical Sherlock Holmes by the name of Abraham Gentry. This film's quite notable for having Henny Youngman, who's quite a big American comedian. You might actually recognise him from appearing in Goodfellas. He's got a very small role as that, playing himself. That was released many years later in 1990. This film's got many noticeable sequences. There's a scene where some feminists break into a strip club with placards. Also in the strip club as well, there is a Vietnam veteran who's drawing faces on fruit and smashing them on the bar. Some of his dialogue's quite funny as well. There's a sequence where the reporter passes out and Abraham Gentry decides to pour 7-Up on her face. I don't know if that's product placement or not, but he pours that on her face to wake her up. There's a scene where she tries to seduce him and he actually turns to camera and he goes, "Ooh, I think not," which was just absolutely hilarious. The conclusion of this movie, I'm not going to spoil in whimsical who's done it of the murder towards the end, but the murderer does meet an untimely end, which lasts for about 4 seconds of the film, and he's so badly shot, had to rewind it to work out what was going on. And Gentry has a line at the end of the film where he's finally getting to canoodle this kind of Lois Lane type character, and he turns to the camera and he says something like, "I think you've seen enough," and pulls the screen down. This is kind of like classic kind of William Castle style filmmaking. Absolutely hilarious. Check this movie out. Some of the gore though is incredibly extreme for its day. If you're not used to, even if you're used to the kind of like Hostel level stuff that's out today, some of the gore sequences are pretty freaky, but there's so much dialogue in this movie. I absolutely love it. I strongly recommend the Gore Gore Girls. Next up is Orca The Killer Whale from 1977, directed by Michael Anderson, who had quite a pedigree, directed Logan's Run and The Dam Busters. Well, what went wrong? Well, he was under the stewardship of Dino De Laurentiis, who was a legendary Italian film producer, produced films with David Lynch like Blue Velvet, Flash Gordon, and hundreds and hundreds of movies. I think he claimed to have produced about 300. And this movie was very much a rip-off of Jaws, and it was supposed to be the big comeback movie for an acting legend, Richard Harris. I'm a massive Harris fan. If you love Harris, check out another film he did called The Wild Geese with Roger Moore. I'm smiling because I enjoy that film so much as well. What can we say about Orca? Well, many people have actually said there's an element of social commentary in there as well. It's about a killer whale that loses its mate that is pregnant with its, I don't know the technical term, its cub or its baby whale in a way, because they harpoon this whale, pull it up onto the deck, and it miscarries onto the deck. That's a really disturbing scene to watch. When I first saw it when I was 18, it made me feel a bit sickly. But a lot of people kind of read into the social commentary of what's described as Roe versus Wade in America, and it was this big kind of debate and court case with regards to the rights to abortion. So people kind of see something in there. I wouldn't look for too much social commentary in this film. Richard Harris is hilariously over top. He's incredibly chauvinistic in this role. And he kind of gets what he deserves at the end of the film. Spoiler alert, at the end of this movie, he's pretty much bitch slapped by the whale and he goes flying into an iceberg and dies with several broken bones. That's quite a spoiler for you there. Also in the cast, you get Charlotte Rampling trying to take things seriously. You get Bo Derek, whose well-turned ankle's pretty much bitten off halfway through the movie, despite the fact she's on land. So there's like this kind of house which is over the water, and the whale kind of manages to knock part of the house away and bite her leg off. You get Will Sampson as well, famous for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, saying how sacred and wonderful whales are. He doesn't last very long in the movie, but he's always a welcome screen presence. But it's the fact that, you know, in Jaws, you just think, well, get off the water, just go onto the land. But this is a super clever whale that gets its own close-ups of its emotive, tearful eyes as well. And I mean, you know, it is rightfully tearful. At the beginning of the movie, its mate, the female whale, is suicidal. It purposely, once it's harpooned, swims into the propeller, and one of the characters said it's trying to commit suicide. I mean, who's heard of a suicidal whale? I'm not a marine biologist, despite the fact I'm dressed like I've kind of just come from the Caribbean. But, you know, it's just absolutely ridiculous. But this whale manages to blow up half the town. I am not joking. It does it with, I can't remember if it's a gas pipeline or an oil pipeline. Absolutely hilarious. And they try and kind of bring in this parallel story where Richard Harris is supposed to have lost his wife and child in a car accident, and it's supposed to be like a parallel with the whale, so you can kind of relate to it despite the fact it's his enemy as well. And there's a really cheesy song, I think it's Ennio Morricone, the famous Italian composer that does the music, but there's a song called We Are One which comes on at the end with like a kind of heavenly kind of choir vibe about it. This movie's absolutely crazy. Some people consider it one of the worst movies ever made, but I'd rather watch this than all the formulaic misogynistic trash like Transformers that's out at the cinema. So that's Orca The Killer Whale. Next up is Forbidden Zone from 1980, directed by Richard Elfman, the brother of Danny Elfman, the very, very famous and Oscar-winning film composer, perhaps most noticeable for working with Tim Burton and composing the Batman theme for the mid-90s movies. And this movie was made to kind of showcase the talents of a kind of satirical musical group called the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, which Danny Elfman was one of the lead singers in. And in his stand-up performance, he plays the devil in this movie, which was taken from their stage show, singing the famous song made famous by Cab Calloway, the one that goes, "Hidey, hidey, hidey, hi, hoody, 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 ho." What can I say about this movie? I mean, I've got the black and white version. There's a colorized version as well. It's interesting. It's kind of a very un-PC film when we look back at it now. It's got a particular spiky sense of humour, which if you're used to, it's okay. If you're not used to that, you might find some of it a bit offensive. So there's quite a lot of Jewish humour in here. There's lots of jokes about ethnicity, New York City, etc., things like that. There's a song called the Yiddish Charleston, which is about like Jewish stereotypes, which is just absolutely out of this world. The plot, as I understand it, is somebody ends up in the sixth dimension and they need to be saved. Basically, there are princesses, which you would expect in kind of fairy tale type stories. There's also frog butlers and Hervé Villechaize, famous for The Man with the Golden Gun, the James Bond film, and the TV show Fantasy Island. This is a film you have to watch to believe. There's a really strange alphabet song in a classroom. I'm a teacher, so I really find that scene particularly funny. I can't even quote some of the lines from this film because some people might find it offensive, but this is one that's worth having a couple of like glasses of wine with and watching with your friends. The next film is The Manitou from 1978. This is a film that I hadn't actually heard of until one of my best friends mentioned it in the pub to me one day, and I tracked it down, paid quite a bit of money for it, but it was well worth it. This is a Tony Curtis vehicle from the late 1970s, where his star credentials had waned just a little bit, and you can kind of see that in this movie. He's got a pretty decent perm though, and he plays a kind of spiritual medium in a way. And these films are often difficult to describe the plots of them because they're often quite convoluted and strange, but there is a character who goes to hospital and it turns out there is this fetus growing in her neck, and it turns out it is a 400-year-old, some sort of Native American spirit that's come back after centuries to rule the world or something like this. And there's a fantastic scene where Tony Curtis comes across a woman called Mrs. Williams. She comes to have like a palm read and tarot cards read, I think it is. And she just gets up and levitates down the corridor and falls down the stairs. Now, old lady is falling down the stairs, not funny, but in this movie, hysterically funny. It's just the gaunt expression on her face and the way she falls, and it's clearly a stuntman. Also, you get an appearance from Burgess Meredith as well, famous for playing the Penguin in the 1960s Batman series, and also the trainer in the Rocky movies. You also get an appearance from Stella Stevens, who was quite a big star in the 1950s, appearing in Jerry Lewis comedies. She's kind of famous for being blonde and being able to walk down corridors and smile. But she was actually quite an underrated actress. She had a really good appearance in The Ballad of Cable Hogue, which is a terrific Sam Peckinpah film, which is quite underrated. It's one of his few films that have a PG rating in the UK, so that's worth checking out as well. You also get a Native American character whose character name is John Singing Rock, and he has to, at the end of the film, try and help them get rid of this 400-year-old creature, this spirit that's returning. There's a sequence towards the end with kind of laser beams and things in the hospital that I don't want to spoil. I couldn't even possibly describe it. I think I'd need like a PhD in creative writing and English to be able to describe that scene, but that's another one worth checking out. To finish off, we have a double bill by the same director. We have 1983's Atlantis Interceptors, this is the Italian cover here, and also Phantom of Death, directed by Ruggero Deodato, most famous for directing Cannibal Holocaust, a kind of horror movie classic. What can we say about Phantom of Death? Well, this movie stars Michael York, perhaps most famous for Logan's Run, and he is a pianist that is slowly, he's quite quickly degenerating because he's got this quite nasty disease, so his skin's starting to rot away and he's aging really, really quickly, and he kind of goes a bit mad basically, and he's quite angry about this and starts killing people off. Donald Pleasence stars as the policeman, kind of echoing his role as Dr. Sam Loomis in Halloween. He has some hilarious sequences. There's a sequence where he runs into a courtyard and he is swearing his head off, which is not really like Donald Pleasence. I can't quote it because some of my students might be watching, but some of the language is quite hilarious. There's also an appearance from a guy called Deep Roy as well, who was like an Italian movie legend. I think he might have been a producer. It's like this quite smallish guy, a little person. He appears in Flash Gordon. He appears as the Oompa Loompa, all the Oompa Loompas in the Tim Burton Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie. He's in loads of different films. He's in one of the Pink Panther films as well. I think it's Pink Panther Strikes Again or Pink Panther Strikes Back, and he has a little cameo, and he's quite predominant in the trailer, but he barely features in the film. He's supposed to be somebody with this degenerative disease. Atlantis Interceptors is a bit of kind of nonsensical fun. It's like a kind of cross between a zombie movie and Miami Vice. You get the people from the lost city of Atlantis decide to come up on land, and the way that we're going to fight them is to kind of steal their crystal skulls. It's pretty much an action movie. There's not tons of plot. Christopher Connolly is quite good. And there's some interesting kind of multiculturalism discussed in like a positive light throughout this movie, not to do with the people of Atlantis, with other cultures, so that's quite nice. But there's one of my favourite lines of all time where a character explains to the audience what's going on. So they get to Atlantis towards the end, no major spoilers here, and they're kind of trapped in this room. You hear like a laser beam sound, and one character turns to another and says, "Captain, can't move, we've been immobilized." Hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Video Vortex. It's been enormous fun and I've been smiling throughout it. Please check out some of these movies, they're enormously entertaining. There will be a zombie movie guilty pleasure special on the way soon. Again, thank you very much for watching. Good night.